So this 40K Tactica is from a number of years ago, but it still holds true to this day. It still works because the DNA, kind of the core mechanics of 40K that is playing, it has not changed. So I want to push this up to my archive, and I'm going to have an accompanying piece over on my blog. The link to my blog is underneath this video podcast vlog. You can check it out and kind of catch it on that medium also. Sign up for my mailing list and kind of all that housekeeping type stuff. So 40K DNA, 40K rule structure is essentially a you go, I go system. You do your stuff. I hang out for a bit. Maybe I make some armor saves. Maybe I activate some special powers to try and counter something. But essentially, I'm passive. Then when you're done, I get to go. This is on a D6 mechanic. That is important because the spread of the dice is only limited to the D6. Now, we can have mechanics like exploding dice or rerolls or modifiers, but that's different than, say, a D100 type system. It just is. And then on top of that, we have a finite game turn structure, whether it's an agreed upon, if it's a tournament, or if it's a random game length. But a 40K ends at some point. It's not like Battletech where it's both players going at some point simultaneously at the same time based on the interactions, but the game goes until the mission is complete. So if I'm moving ahead and advancing and all of a sudden you've kind of blockaded me in, I can pull back, I can retreat, I can run back to my deployment zone, hang out for a bit, see another opportunity, push forward. In 40K, when you've committed, you've committed. So we have this rule structure here, and we have a really powerful unit. In this case, borrowing an example from years ago, when I was playing my Necrons, before Necrons used to be really awful. But I loved the narrative. I loved their war gear. They had some really quirky war gear. An example of that was the Nightmare Shroud. You would put this on a Lord, and when you popped it off, you could pop it every turn. When you popped it off, any unit within a 12-inch radius would have to take a leadership test. And if they failed, they'd run. So I would take the Nightmare Shroud. I'd put it on a Destroyer Lord who moved very, very fast. I would attach the Destroyer Lord to Scarabs, so they'd kind of soak up all the damage. And gunline armies were popular in 40K at the time. This was in 4th edition. I would run that Destroyer Lord into the back lines, and I would pop off the Nightmare Shroud. If I'm hitting 3 or 4 or 5 units a turn, and you're rolling 2d6, because remember, it's a d6-based system. We're going to look to exploit that. You're going to fail. You're going to fall back 2d6. You're right at the table edge. And what was interesting for a brief time, because Games Workshop did not FAQ their stuff at all. I mean, they were awful previously. The greatest example was the Black Templar Codex used to be separate from the Space Marine Codex, the generic Space Marine Codex. And when they updated the Space Marine Codex, they made Storm Shields 3+ invulnerable. So you had these Terminators, Storm Shield, Thunderhammer, 3+ invulnerable in the Marine Codex. Previously in the Marine Codex, they were 5+ invulnerable on there. And the Black Templars was 5+. Black Templar Codex was separate. So if you played Black Templars, you had garbage 5+ Storm Shields, so you took Lightning Claws on there, and GW refused to FAQ it. And it was rules as written for tournaments. So what was interesting with the Nightmare Shroud for a brief while, because Games Workshop completely neglected it. And, okay, is this a little bit neckbeardy? Is it a little bit broken? Well, when you're playing the worst army, you really can't complain. And that's what I loved about playing Necrons at the time, because arguably it was the worst 40K army to play. So not only when I would have a victory, I would have a victory and get to feel that. 2, you got beaten by Necrons, bro. Space robots. And 3, you couldn't complain about anything because the army was just so terabad on there. But the rules were, they affected even fearless units. They affected everything. So playing this, that's just side tangent way on there. Another thing I used was the deceiver. So the Satan were actually gods, actually living gods. They were not shards. They were not rewritten. They weren't warded or anything. And this was a really, really powerful unit because it got invulnerable saves no matter what. So unless it was going against, remember this is 4th edition, unless it was going against Psy-Cannon Grey Knights who ignored invulnerable saves, you were going to be around for a while. High strength, high toughness, multi-wound, Really potent, really powerful. When it hit you with the living metal, it had the same type of properties as the assassin with the Satan phase sword. You got no invulnerable save, no armor save. You were just dead. That's it. You're just dead. So if you threw the deceiver into this unit, it would cleave through it. So I really loved playing it. Problem was, it was one unit, and while it wasn't particularly fast, it wasn't particularly slow because it could ignore terrain, so you could kind of go through terrain and not have to roll with the living metal. But it was one unit. It couldn't be everywhere at once on the table. And going back to the DNA of 40K, it's a finite number of turns. If I spend 4 turns running up the table, I only have, 2, 3 turns, depending on what we're playing, left to affect something on there. And then we get into the Highlander effect. I love Highlander. There's certain movies that are just my programming, my DNA, right? Highlander, Conan, things like that. And MacLeod is fighting before the Kurgan, right? Before the Kurgan's trying to chase him down on the battlefield. And he's running around trying to get glory fighting people. And they're like, no, not him, not him. They're running away. So it was this Highlander effect where my Satan is trying to get into the assault. He's trying to mess you up, but you're just running away. I can't catch anybody on there, and I'm burning game turns. And I have my points tied up in this unit, which gets us to the third calculation of 40K, where if you spend X number of points for a unit, here's how you judge its efficiency on the table. Did it kill 1.5 to 2 times its value? If it didn't, you're not getting its point out of it. Another way to track efficiency, and this is a little bit harder, however many points or power level or whatever it's going to be, whatever calculation you're using, slots that it takes up for the unit on there, Force Org type things, the points, if it doesn't kill that number of points, does it keep the number of points busy? So if I'm pushing up a Death Star type unit here, and I've got 3 tack squads that then push back, how much do those 3 tack squads cost? Opposing tack squads added up. If it's more than the battle value of my unit, then at least I'm affecting that in that turn. I'm earning the points for that turn. So we're looking at that. How the heck do I earn these points if everything's running away? So this brings us to the tacta of today, where Death Stars are still very potent. There's still some very strong units. A lot of guys running Primarchs and things like that. They're now mainstream, right? A lot of different things you can do. Things are a little bit easier in 40K because the games are much, much bigger. The tables are still the standard gaming size table. And I don't mean this as a criticism, because I'm a little bit guilty of this too. There is not enough terrain in 40K. And I believe part of that, on a side note, is because 40K is often played at a gaming store where there might not be tables dedicated to a specific 40K setup, but also in a gaming store or a club, and I believe this to be true, everyone should get to play. I remember once being at the store, Comic Book Heaven back in the day, where it was packed. It was just packed. I was lucky to get one of the last tables, and we had like 6 or 7 pieces of terrain, big, small, different things. And 2 new players showed up, and they wanted to play. And it was like, well, there's no tables for you. So myself and BC, Brother Captain James, we were playing, and it was like, you guys want to play, then you got to play. You showed up, right? There's room for everybody. So we found this, this other table somewhere, and we took our terrain and shared it with the other group, and they got to play a game. And we gave them a little bit more terrain so they would have a proper game of 40K. And now, next thing I know, I'm playing a game where I've got my Samhan Warhost versus BC's Ultramarines, and we've got one group of trees in the center of the board and a lake over to the left. I mean, it was just extremely one-sided in there. So often what we'll see is there's not enough terrain on the table. So this makes a very target-rich environment. It makes things a little bit easier for this tactica. So you have your Death Star unit. Turn 1, it's going to be moving to get into position. There's very rare circumstances where we're going to be activating on turn 1, actively killing points. So that means after turn 1, you need to be killing stuff either in the assault or shooting or affecting units for every single turn as long as the game is going on, as long as the game is alive and that unit is up. Obviously, once it's killed or destroyed or terminated or whatever, it's over on there. So you need to bring the units in. You need to look at the mission and say, are there mission objectives? You know, a lot of us, greatest example, we still enjoy playing the Relic mission, where there's kind of a piece in the center, or capture the flag in the center. We love exploring different 40K missions. That means that center of the table is going to be ground zero. That center of the table is going to be, you know, alpha point. I'm going to send that Death Star unit up in there, and I'm just going to camp there. Because my opponent has finite game turns, the DNA of 40K. There's only so many turns to do what you got to do. They're going to be pulled in towards me. Another great example would be, is there some terrain, you know, going back to this idea of terrain, is there some terrain somewhere where it's going to dictate the win? Meaning, you know, if there's like a fortress, okay, if there's a Fortress of Redemption or some sort of fortress and you're playing it like that, and it's got heavy bolter emplacements, and it's got the missiles, and it's got all the stuff, whoever gets to that fortress first has a tremendous advantage. I'm still going to try and get to that fortress with some other units, but I know you're going to be going that direction too. So on my deployment zone, I'll shift that Death Star unit over to the left side of the table, and I'm going to be heading straight for it. So are there ways that you can manipulate your opponent to meet you halfway? Are there ways that, you know, as you send that Death Star unit forward, your opponent is going to have to, based on the mission, based on the terrain, based on whatever, that they're going to have to encounter you, or they're going to have to move into you on there? And this works potentially for shooting too, a really powerful shooting unit. Another example from years ago, and if I can find the picture, I'm going to put it up on the splash screen here, and I'm going to put it up on my blog. Jowl Balls and I were playing a doubles game. And this was really interesting. I love doubles games because it's twice the fun. It's a lot of interesting interaction. What I don't like about doubles games is where cats take their main army and just split it into two. I think a doubles game should be two distinctly different armies on there. And so I was playing my Eldar, Sam Han, and Jawa, of course, was playing his Blood Angels. So the interesting thing about the ruling for this doubles tournament, and you know, looking back, it probably wasn't really a good idea for the tournament organizer to do this. I understand what he was doing, trying to make some synergies. And Jawa and I, you know, we were trying to control ourselves. I was trying to be good. I really was. But you can't dangle a carrot like this in front of me and not expect me to take it with it. And again, this was a couple of rule additions back. So for the narrative of it, there was this giant building, perfect, kind of ruined hardcover, which means if you shoot into it at the time of the rule set, you were getting a 4-up save. Now, this was the time of vehicles where if half the facing, if you couldn't see the full facing and it was on a weird angle, you'd get a 3-up save on the vehicle. So any type of shooting, 3-up save. That's huge. So we realized, Jawa Balls' Vindicator, Blood Red 1, if we put that in this building, if we park that in this building, it's going to get a 3-up cover save on there. That's pretty crazy. So then we realized, okay, well, if we put it in this building, it means it's not moving at all. So we've got to get some people into range of that demolisher cannon on there. We have to bring them into range and you know, drop that on them. So how do we do that? Well, it was objectives. It was 3 objectives. The opponent places an objective, we place an objective, and then there's one more kind of in the center of the table. So we place the objective in the center of the table, but in range of this Vindicator. So if the opponent went for that 3rd objective, they were going to get bombed every turn. We were not going to go for our opponent's objective in their deployment zone. We weren't going to waste our model resources on that, because even if we could take it, it was just going to be a grind. We were going to give that one to them. We were going to bomb everything we have. Everything. I was taking, you know, all of my ground troops, my Storm Guardians, my Dire Avengers at the time, even my jet bikes. I don't normally use them this way, but everything. And we were going to take that objective in the center of the table. We were just going to pile up stuff. That means the objective near the Vindicator is completely open. We were going to leave it. So our opponent, looking at that, we figured, well, they're going to go for that objective that's open. Okay, look, they're going to take a Vindicator shot every turn. Yeah, you know what? They could probably take it. They could probably do it. And then at the last turn, because we were letting our opponents go first because we figured we'd win and we'd pass, or if they go first, most people want to go first in 40K rather than pass. we were going to then zip over some of my jet bikes to take that third objective. That's the plan going in. Now, what was interesting, I was playing Eldrad. Eldar Psychic powers were a little bit different at the time, and the tournament organizers' rules allowed cross powers. So my Space Elf powers I could cast not just on Eldar units, I could cast them on Blood Angel units. And likewise, the Sanguinary Priests handing out free rerolls on everything could pass to my Eldar. Made my Storm Guardians beast. Made the Storm Guardians like just marine killers because they got huge buffs, they got huge rerolls, and they were really, really cheap in the points. So when you saw 20 to 30 Storm Guardians running out at you, normally you wouldn't be that afraid. But when they suddenly have Space Marine stats going at initiative 6, 2 weapon attacks, 1 on the charge, 1 offhand, that's a lot of stuff coming at you. I mean, that's like, wait, what? And those guys cost, 6 points each. What on there? But Eldrad was hanging back with the Vindicator. And I was casting Guide and Fortune every turn. Guide, Fortune. So Fortune allows you to re-roll armor and cover saves, all types of saves. So if they shot at the Vindicator, it's a 3+ save. Well, first you got to hit, 3+ save, and then I get a re-roll. That Vindicator was going nowhere. And then with Guide, and Doom too, because you cast 3 powers. Guide allowed the reroll to hit, so that Vindicator always hit. And Doom allowed a unit to reroll failed wounds. So literally, our opponents were rolling up on that objective because it was a free, and we were blasting a unit a turn. We were obliterating a unit a turn on there. Way off topic, way old school, but this is the type of thinking. I say this as an example because this is the type of thinking, while it was a very unique one-off game, when you sit down, you got to look at that terrain, and you got to look at your models, and you got to say, okay, how can I bring my opponent to a point where my Devastators or my Vindicator or whatever my high-volume damage dice units are going to be, that every turn they're going to get to shoot. And get into that position, because I don't want to go hunting for targets. I want to bring those targets into me. So what can you see? What can you do? What can you look for to do that?